Her true story from Nevada. My son once laughed and said, "You're just a burden." This was after I gave him my savings, so I took back the wedding fund. He toasted to freedom. I toasted to silence. You are an old hag. You're just a burden. Don't trip on your walker. Yeah, it was one of those perfect Nevada evenings. Warm breeze, sunset bleeding across the desert sky, and the hilltop villa glittering under string lights. I remembered thinking it all looked like a postcard, and that somewhere inside me, I hoped for a postcard moment, too. But that night, the world had other plans. Before we start, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the videos as long as possible. By watching more often, YouTube will promote these stories to a larger audience, grow your channel, and bring you more interesting things. Let's start now. My son Travis was lighting cigars with his best man, standing beneath an arch of white roses that matched the lavish spread before him. Every detail, crystal, linen, champagne, had been carefully curated even by me. My savings paid for it all, because the bride, Kayla, did not have credit. My own account had become their wedding fund, tucked away under my name, but meant for their future. I carried a tray of petite cakes, each one topped with a swirl of vanilla buttercream and a raspberry. My hands, though aged, still remembered the gentle precision I had mastered over decades of baking for holidays and birthdays. I bent to arrange the sweets on a lace-covered table when my grip loosened. Maybe arthritis, maybe fatigue, but whatever it was, I lost hold of the tray. The tray fell. The delicate cakes tumbled like dominoes. Glass shattered. Frosting splattered across linen. Gasps filled the air. My heart clenched. "Back to your garage, Mom," I heard Travis say, his voice cutting through the silence like a whip. He didn't even glance at me. He kept his eyes on Kayla's parents. "You are an old hag." "You're just a burden. Don't trip on your walker." "Yeah." When he spoke, everyone laughed. Kayla offered a tight, forced smile and turned away. The laughter echoed, drowning out my embarrassment. I froze. My cheeks burned, a hot blur of shame. I looked down at the shards between my shaking legs and felt every eye on me, some amused, some sympathetic, but none offering kindness. One of Travis's friends cracked a joke I couldn't fully hear, and it made the others laugh harder. My cake disaster had become entertainment, my pain part of the show. I tried to swallow back the lump in my throat. I pressed my lips together to keep from crying. I wanted to lean on someone, anyone, but no one moved. No one reached for me. No one apologized. Have you ever felt that invisible, that disposable? If you've ever been hurt by family, leave a 5 so she knows she's not the only one. It was as if, in that moment, I did not exist. I straightened and reached for a napkin, glancing at Travis for a flicker of regret, or at least recognition. But he held his champagne glass high, leaning toward Kayla, who toasted back with the same practiced smile she had used earlier to greet me when I arrived at the villa. I set the napkin down and let the tray clatter against the table. I straightened my pastel dress and smoothed my hair the way I thought would make me invisible. I heard someone say, "Make way for the mother of the groom," in a mocking tone. I didn't look back. I walked slowly toward the edge of the terrace, through droplets of candlelight, past the hors d'oeuvre stations that had been so carefully planned, and into the darkness beyond the lights. My heart pounded. I felt bruised in a way that money couldn't fix. My knees trembled beneath me. The drinks passed between guests. Glasses clinked. Voices buzzed. But I walked on, the cruel laughter still ringing in my ears. Outside, a stiff desert breeze met me, cool but harsh. I wrapped my shawl tighter around myself. The air smelled of creosote and hot earth. I breathed in deeply, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Travis's mother had texted, asking if I was okay. Good timing. I found a checkpoint where I could open the message. I typed back, "I'm fine," though the ache in my chest said otherwise. A few steps later, tears fell. Real, hot tears that caught on the collar of my dress. I didn't wipe them. I let them fall as I walked, until I reached the valet stand. The attendant handed me my keys, eyes wide with confusion. He didn't know the gossip. He didn't know what had happened behind the lights. He only knew I was the mother of the groom. "Thank you," I managed. My voice shook. He didn't ask more. He couldn't. I slid into my car and closed the door quietly. The fit of my dress felt wrong now. The heels pinched my feet. My reflection in the window was a woman I barely recognized. Finally, I drove away. Not home, but from the noise, the judgment, the eyes that never saw me. The drive was long and quiet. No music, no radio, just me, the road, and a heart heavy with what had just happened. I thought of the money in that account, my retirement fund, now gone, poured into a wedding I wouldn't be allowed to attend. I thought of the invitation they never sent me to eat cake. I thought of the face of the child I raised, who now called me a burden. I reached a small motel off the freeway. The neon sign buzzed. I checked in under a false name, just Evelyn, for a night. The clerk murmured that breakfast came at 8. I nodded, paid with a card I kept for emergencies, and slipped into a room with 2 twin beds. I didn't take off my dress. I didn't take off my heels. I simply sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a box of tissues, staring at the wall. I felt empty, not sad, not angry, empty. And deep inside, I felt a spark, a small, brittle ember of something I had forgotten existed. Something called self-respect. Because when I closed my eyes, I realized I had not come to be laughed at. I had come to celebrate my son. And now, I didn't even pretend to belong. Later, I fell asleep, fully clothed, and with a promise. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, I choose me." After my husband died, silence became my new routine. No more cups of coffee brewed for 2. No more sports on the television. No more grumbling about the heater or lawn or the soup being too salty. Just me and the garage. I moved into the small room behind it, converting the dusty space into something livable. It had a bed, a mini fridge, and a microwave. And if I angled the lawn chair just right under the window, I could catch a bit of sun in the afternoon. I made do. When you grow up with very little, you learn to stretch joy from crumbs. I lived frugally. I clipped coupons, skipped birthday dinners out, and sold my baked goods at weekend markets. I even worked part-time, changing oil at a friend's garage. Just enough to add to the nest egg. every penny went into one thing: my savings. That little account meant safety. It meant I could someday move out of the garage and into a real home again. Perhaps a small place with flowers, a porch swing, and a radio that hummed old jazz on Sunday afternoons. Then came the phone call. Travis's voice was excited, rushed. "Mom," I proposed. Kayla said yes. I remember the joy that bloomed inside me like spring after a bitter winter. "We want to buy a house," he continued. "Something big enough for the future. You know. But the bank? Well, the bank wants a bigger down payment." There was a pause, a space I filled before he had to ask. "How much are you short?" I asked. His answer was $121,000. He explained that Kayla's parents were contributing what they could, and if only he had a little help, they could secure the dream home near the golf course with a kitchen island and a backyard for future kids. My hand trembled holding the phone, not out of hesitation, but from the weight of the decision I was already making, because I believed then, fiercely, that love was not something you withheld, that a mother's love meant giving, no strings, no contracts, just faith. The next morning, I went to the bank and withdrew every last dollar. I didn't even tell Travis the full truth, that it was all I had, that I had drained the savings account entirely, that I had closed it with a thank you to the teller, and a smile I practiced on the walk to the branch. I handed him the check in an envelope wrapped in gold ribbon. He hugged me and said, "You're amazing." "Mom." It was the last time he said that. They moved into the new house weeks later. I was invited over a few times, mostly when help was needed putting furniture together, or when the sink clogged and a plumber cost too much. I never asked for anything in return. I never brought up the money. Not when they upgraded their car. Not when they flew to Aruba for their engagement shoot. Not when the wedding invitations arrived, designed with gold foil and pressed florals. I remained in the garage, still working, still quiet, still proud, in my own quiet way, that my son had everything I never did. Until the engagement party, until the cake, the laughter, his words, that smirk. "You're just a burden, Mom." He said it like it was a joke, like I was an afterthought, a shadow clinging to the edges of his spotlight. That night, after I left the villa and checked into the motel, I lay awake staring at the popcorn ceiling and felt something crack inside. Not like the break that comes with sudden grief, but like the slow snap of something stretched too far for too long. In that moment, I saw the truth I had refused to accept. I had given Travis everything: my time, my youth, my love, my money, my safety, and what I had received in return was not respect. It was erasure. He did not remember the garage shifts. He did not know I had pawned my grandmother's brooch to cover the last $800 of that down payment. He did not know that I gave him everything, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to never feel the hunger I had known. But what I failed to teach him was gratitude. What I failed to demand was respect. That night, lying on that motel bed, I made another decision, not out of anger, but out of something cleaner, clarity. And from that clarity, I whispered to myself, "No more." I came back that night to my little garage room, the one with the cot pressed against the wall and the smell of cold concrete in the air. The light flickered for a moment before steadying. The silence wasn't new, but that night, It wrapped tighter around me like a coat made of old sorrow. I placed the leftovers from the engagement party on the counter. No one had stopped me as I left. No one had asked if I was okay. Not Travis, not Kayla, not one guest. My hand trembled as I poured myself a glass of water. I could still hear the laughter. Travis's mocking voice echoing in my ears. The way Kayla chuckled like it was all harmless fun. That moment had burned into me, more than the sting of embarrassment. It was the realization that somewhere between giving birth and giving everything, I had become invisible. The next morning, I received a text from Kayla. "Hey, Evelyn, sorry if Travis came off harsh. He was just joking. Don't take it so seriously." Okay, it was a big night. No apology, no accountability. Just a smooth brush off and a smiley face emoji at the end, like I was a moody child who needed a nap. I stared at the screen for a long time, then turned it off. For days, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront Travis. I didn't demand an explanation. I cooked when asked, cleaned up when the sink overflowed, took out the trash when no one else noticed it piling up, and when the florist came by to finalize the wedding flowers, Kayla asked me to just stay in the back. This is kind of a formal meeting, so I sat in the garage with a tepid mug of tea and the hum of a space heater, pretending it was enough. One night, after they had gone out for yet another dinner with friends I wasn't introduced to, I opened the wooden box tucked under my cot. Inside were envelopes, birthday cards, school photos, a lock of baby hair taped inside an old journal, and the one thing that caught my eye, the card from his 10th grade birthday. To the strongest woman I know. Travis had written in shaky teenage handwriting, "One day I'll buy you a big house so you don't ever have to work again." I held the card in my hands, tracing the ink with my finger like it might bring back the boy who once looked at me with admiration instead of inconvenience. Where had that boy gone? Somewhere between adolescence and adulthood. He had forgotten, or maybe I had allowed it to happen, slowly, without resistance. Every small surrender I made, every unspoken disappointment, had trained him to believe that I would always be there, always quiet, always giving. I wasn't even the guest of honor at this new chapter of his life. I was just a fixture, like a forgotten photo on a shelf. There, but not seen. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. Gray hair, escaping its bun. Lines etched around my mouth. Eyes that still searched for softness in people who had long stopped offering it. I wore slippers with holes in the soles and a sweater that had once belonged to my husband. Somehow I had convinced myself that this was all acceptable, that it was okay to be treated like a shadow as long as my son was happy. But I wasn't okay, and he wasn't happy because of me. He was comfortable because of me, enabled by me, and now, emboldened to treat me like I owed him even more. I had been more than a mother. I had been a nurse when he had chickenpox, a tutor during algebra, a chef when he was a picky eater, a cheerleader through his baseball years. I had been the net every time he fell, the shelter every time it rained. But now I was the afterthought, the burden, the joke. That night, as they laughed in the living room watching some wedding reality show, I sat at the edge of my cot and cried. Not the loud, sobbing kind, but the quiet, leaking kind. The kind that slips out when your soul finally admits it is tired. I reached under the cot and pulled out the photo album, the one they had no interest in flipping through. Page after page of our life. The beach trips, the lost teeth, the birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs. In every photo, I saw a version of me I had forgotten. Strong, proud, essential. I stared at a photo of Travis on his graduation day. I had stood behind him, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt, holding a handmade sign that read, "You made it, and so did I." He had wrapped an arm around me then. That same arm now reached past me at the dinner table. That same boy now told me to stay out of the way. My tears blurred the image, but I didn't wipe them away. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the dim light of the garage, holding those pieces of our past and realizing one painful truth. The boy who had once called me his hero had grown into a man who no longer saw me at all. I had not stepped foot into an office like this in years. The smell of wood polish, the soft ticking of a clock, the hush of quiet decisions being made, it all felt foreign, and yet, for some reason, I was not afraid. I sat on the edge of a leather chair in the office of Mr. Harold Keene, a lawyer I once used during probate after my husband passed. The same man who had helped me close the chapter on a marriage of 35 years was now going to help me close something else. "Mrs. Hill," he greeted kindly, adjusting his glasses. "What can I do for you today?" I pulled the small blue folder from my handbag and placed it on his desk. "I need to know if I still have rights to this account," I said simply. He opened it, scanning the paperwork. "The wedding fund," he said, reading aloud. "Set up for Travis Hill and Kayla Monroe. You're listed here as a joint account holder, along with Kayla, but not Travis." "That's right. She did not have good credit. They asked me to co-sign." Harold nodded slowly, then looked up at me with a question in his eyes. "Are you trying to make a withdrawal?" "I am," I said. "Before it's spent on a wedding I no longer belong to." He tilted his head, waiting. So I told him. Not the long version, just enough. The cake tray, the laugh, the insult in front of a room full of people I had partly paid for. I did not cry. My voice did not shake. I just said the truth. I gave everything. Now I want back what is still legally mine. Harold leaned back, folding his hands. "You are well within your rights. The funds have not been dispersed to any vendor yet, and no binding contracts have been finalized using this account. If you'd like to withdraw, you may do so today." "Do it," I said. Within the hour, the paperwork was drawn up. I signed page after page. Not once did my hand tremble. Harold asked if I wanted the funds wired to a personal checking account or issued as a cashier's check. I chose the check. There was something solid about holding it, something that made it feel like the beginning of a door I had just unlocked. Before I left, I had him prepare a brief letter to the wedding venue and hotel, notifying them that any future transactions referencing that account should be denied. I reviewed every word carefully, ensuring it was firm but professional. As he slid the final envelope across the table, Harold gave me a long look. "Are you sure you do not want to leave a note for your son?" "No," I said. Let the silence do the talking. He had a toast to freedom. "This is mine." I left the office with the Nevada sun hitting my cheeks and the check tucked safely inside my bag. It was a peculiar kind of warmth, not from outside, but inside. A heat I had not felt in a very long time, the kind that comes not from confrontation, but from a long overdue reclaiming of self. Back in my tiny garage studio, I made a cup of tea and sat at the small wooden table that doubled as my writing desk. I opened the journal I used to keep when Travis was a baby. The last entry had been nearly 20 years ago, after he graduated high school. I turned the page and wrote, "Today I remembered that I am not a bank. I am not a ghost. I am not a woman waiting for a thank you. I am Evelyn Hill. I signed away $40,000 for a wedding that did not yet exist. Today, I took it back. This time, I choose myself." It was not revenge. Not exactly. It was not cruelty either. It was something quieter, sharper. It was the refusal to be erased. For days, I went about life as usual. Travis did not call. Kayla did not stop by. There were no apologies, no explanations, just quiet. And for once, I welcomed it. I used part of the money to buy myself a new mattress, one that did not collapse in the middle or make my hips ache in the morning. I bought new curtains and a heater that did not rattle like bones in winter. I went to the local thrift bookstore and found a first edition of my favorite poetry collection for $3. I smiled more. Even at strangers, I did not need fireworks. I only needed peace. They had toasted to a future built on my sacrifices. Now, I toasted to the one thing I had not given myself in decades, the permission to walk away. The morning of Travis's wedding was unusually quiet. I sat on the edge of my foldable bed, sipping tea from an old chipped mug. Outside, the Nevada sun was just starting to rise over the gravel driveway, casting long golden shadows across the garage door. No one had called me. No text. No invite to help with last-minute setup. And that was fine. I had made my decision. The hotel ballroom, where Travis and Kayla had planned the classy champagne-drenched ceremony, was booked with a hefty deposit, a deposit I had funded back when they said they couldn't open the wedding fund account on their own because Kayla's credit was still rebuilding. Back when I still believed I was part of the celebration, they were supposed to walk down the aisle at 2 p.m. At 1:11 p.m., my phone buzzed violently on the metal shelf. Caller ID, Kayla. I let it ring. Then came a second call. Travis. Then Kayla again. This time, I picked up. A voice cracked with panic shrieked into my ear. Evelyn, what did you do? The hotel says they can't process anything. The bar is closed. The food staff isn't even coming out. Her voice turned hysterical. We have guests arriving. My family's already here. You're ruining this. I waited until she paused to breathe, then said calmly, The wedding fund account was closed last week. A beat of silence. What you can't. We had plans, Travis said. I cut her off. You toasted to freedom. Remember? She was too stunned to speak. I'll toast, I said softly, to no longer being your fool. I hung up. I did not throw the phone. I did not cry. I simply set it down and walked to the window. Outside, a car sped down the road, possibly a guest still rushing to the ceremony, unaware it was already crumbling. I imagined the chaos unfolding in that expensive ballroom, waiters refusing to serve, guests murmuring, glancing at each other. The hotel manager, arms crossed, asking for a new payment method that did not exist. I imagined Travis's face turning red, not out of guilt or shame, but disbelief that the world was no longer handing him things for free. He had stood at his engagement party and called me a burden. Now, he would stand in front of 150 guests and watch everything collapse around him. I did not need revenge. I only needed the silence that followed truth. At 3:30 p.m., Emily dropped by with a pie from a bakery in Reno. She opened the garage door, saw me sitting on the porch in the sun, and smiled. "You want to eat this before it gets warm?" she asked. I nodded. We sat side by side, watching dust swirl in the dry afternoon air. She handed me a plate, then paused. "You did it, didn't you?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I did what needed to be done. Emily sipped her tea, then said, "You don't owe them anything, you know? Not anymore." I looked out toward the road, where no one came, and smiled. I know. That evening, I turned my phone off. The messages kept coming. Long rants, short curses, even crying voicemails. I deleted them all. The sun set behind the hills as I curled up under my thin blanket, listening not to apologies or blame, but to the peaceful sound of my own breath. It was the first quiet night I had had in years, and the first one I chose for myself. When the dust settled from the failed wedding, I packed quietly. No fanfare, no shouting, no tears. I left Travis's house with one suitcase, my photo album now filled with empty sleeves, and a folded quilt I had sewn during the first winter after my husband passed. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam any doors. Silence, I found, could be louder than grief. Emily, God bless her, had arranged a small rental unit for me near Reno. A friend of her late husband's, a retired postman named Harold, owned a modest complex behind a quiet bookstore. The rent was fair. The walls were thin but clean, and the window caught the morning sun just right. The day I moved in, I opened every window and let the wind sweep through the rooms. I stood there, in the middle of the tiny living room, arms loose by my side, and exhaled. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I had to ask permission to exist. Each morning, I baked. Nothing fancy, banana bread, sometimes apple scones if the apples were cheap. The smell reminded me of a time when home meant warmth and not walking on eggshells. I dropped off leftovers at the bookstore next door, and the woman there, Marcy, kind eyes behind thick glasses, started saving me new arrivals from the book club section. Wednesdays. I went to the library down the street and volunteered for a children's letter writing program. We taught third graders how to write thank you letters, birthday notes, even letters to their future selves. One little girl wrote to her mother in heaven and sealed it with a sticker shaped like a sunflower. I cried in the bathroom that day, not because it was sad, but because it was honest. My world shrank, but in the best way. No more shouting down halls, no more wondering if today would bring an apology or another cut. There were no sharp words in that apartment, just the hum of the heater, the clink of spoons and mugs, the soft rustle of pages turning before bed, and sleep. God, sleep. For years I had woken up in the middle of the night, my body tense, my mind bracing for something. Footsteps, cold silence, slammed doors, the panic of being needed and unappreciated all at once. But in that new bed, under that old quilt, I slept through the night. I didn't dream of Travis. I dreamed of water, wide and still. I dreamed of sunlight on my hands. Then came the night I opened a bottle of champagne. It had been sitting in the fridge for weeks. A gift from Marcy when she found out I'd moved in. A toast, she'd said, for new beginnings. I hadn't felt ready then, but that evening I did. I poured one glass, then stood in front of the mirror. My hair was gray, pulled into a soft knot. My eyes still had lines from worry, but they were steady. My mouth, though it had been quiet for too long now, curled into the smallest smile. I raised the glass. No crowd, no applause, no white gowns or tiered cakes. Just me and the truth. I'm not a burden, I said softly to my reflection. I'm a survivor. I took a sip. The bubbles tickled and the silence held me gently. No one celebrated me that night, but for the first time in decades, I celebrated myself. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. 3 short taps. Hesitant, not like the postman or the neighbor's grandchild with his messy paper flowers. I opened the door and there he stood, Travis. He looked thinner, not in body, but in pride. His hair was still perfectly styled, but there was no shine in his eyes. Behind him, the street was quiet, the heat of Nevada humming in the background. Mom? He said. I waited. I came to talk. I stepped aside, not because I owed him anything, but because I was no longer the woman who slammed doors or held grudges. I had learned something harder, how to sit still in the presence of someone who had once broken me. He sat on the couch, glancing around the small apartment like it was a museum. His fingers tapped nervously on his jeans. He looked up. Kayla left, he said flatly. She called off the wedding. I said nothing. Weston said, people talk. They think I'm a fraud. Some even think I stole from you. I didn't. Mom, I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I just wanted to have the wedding we dreamed of, and I wanted you there. His voice broke. I need help. Mom, I need to fix this. I need you to help me restore my name. I can't do it alone. Please, just say something. I walked into the kitchen, opened the cupboard, and took out a glass. I poured water from the pitcher and placed the glass in front of him. He looked at it, confused. Then I said calmly, this is what you used to serve me. Silence. He looked down. I'm not angry. I continued. I've been angry. I've screamed into pillows, cried over tea, begged God to rewind time. But not anymore. Now. I'm just done. But you're my mom, he said, his voice cracking. Yes, I am. And I loved you more than breath itself. I gave you my years, my hands, my savings, my peace. And when you had everything you ever asked for, you called me a burden. He reached out like he wanted to touch my hand, but I moved it gently away. I'm not here to hurt you, I said, but I won't erase the consequences for you anymore. That's not love. That's enablement. He nodded slowly. I understand. He stood, looked around one last time, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. His eyes, wet and unsure, met mine. Do you hate me? I shook my head. I don't hate you, but I don't follow pain anymore. That's the difference. He left. No slam door. No last word. Just the soft click of a life closing behind him. I sat down at the table. My tea was still warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I thought was lost. Peace. The folding chairs creaked as people settled into the community library hall. Afternoon sun poured through the high windows, turning the dust in the air into tiny gold stars. There were about 30 of them, mostly women with silver hair, a few younger faces scattered in between. Some clutched notebooks. Others simply watched. I stood at the front, one hand lightly resting on the back of a chair, the other holding a copy of the speech I had written the night before. But I did not read from it. Instead, I looked out at the sea of expectant eyes and spoke from somewhere deeper. My name is Evelyn. I'm not a therapist or an author. I'm just a woman who once confused sacrifice with love, silence with loyalty, and pain with purpose. A few heads nodded. My son once toasted to his freedom. He called me a burden, and for a long time I believed him. I believed that the more I gave, the more I'd be loved, that the quieter I became, the more valuable I'd seem. But I've learned something important. Your worth is not measured by how long you stay silent for love. A wave of silence rippled across the room, not cold, but reverent. I continued. We teach others how to treat us, not just by what we say, but by what we tolerate. I stood by for years, holding out my hands like bridges, hoping someone would cross with gratitude. But when they didn't, I still stayed. Until, one day, I didn't. I paused, scanning the room. You don't have to wait for someone else to value you. You can do that yourself. You must. When I stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm. It was real. People came to shake my hand. Some shared their own stories in whispers. One woman simply hugged me and said, "Thank you for speaking what I've carried for years." That night, as I walked toward the library exit, a man was waiting near the door. He was tall, with kind eyes, wearing a blazer far too neat for a casual event. In his hand, he held a thermos and 2 porcelain cups. "I hope you like chamomile," he said gently. I blinked. He offered a soft smile. "Your talk reminded me of someone I used to love and someone I forgot to love. Myself. My name's Mark." We sat outside on a bench under the turning leaves of early fall, sipping tea. He was a retired architect, a widower, and had recently moved into town. Conversation came easy, effortless like the breeze. Over the next few months, we shared many such cups of tea. Mark never asked about my son, never tried to fix anything. He listened, and when he spoke, it wasn't to impress, but to connect. One evening, as winter melted into spring, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo he had taken during one of our walks by the lake. A candid shot of me laughing, wind in my hair, eyes soft and alive. "You look like someone who remembers how to live," he said. I laughed, then cried. We weren't in a rush. We didn't speak of romance. We spoke of quiet, of books, of second chances. Then one Sunday, as the afternoon sun painted my living room gold, we stood side by the window, 2 glasses of sparkling cider in hand. Mark raised his glass. "To healing," he said. I turned to him, heart steady, smile honest. "You toasted to freedom," I whispered to no one in particular. Then I looked at him and lifted my glass, and I toast to finally choosing mine. Sometimes, silence is not surrender. It is survival. Evelyn gave everything a mother could give. Her love, her savings, her home, her voice. And in return, she was called a burden, forgotten, laughed at. But when the ones she loved most closed their hearts, Evelyn did not shout. She simply stood up, walked away, and quietly chose herself in a world that often tells older women to be quiet, to be useful or invisible. Evelyn reminds us dignity has no expiration date. Her strength did not come from revenge. It came from rediscovery. She learned that love, without respect, is a prison, and that walking alone is better than kneeling in a place you are not valued. This is not just Evelyn's story. This is the story of every grandmother who was told she was too much or not enough, of every mother whose sacrifices were seen as obligations, of every woman who gave her all, then chose to stop giving to those who never looked back. At Grandma True Stories, we share these powerful voices, stories of silent strength, of late justice, of women who found courage not in loud confrontations, but in quiet decisions. Because we believe revenge doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it just needs a signature on a check, or a smile over a cup of tea with someone who finally sees your worth. If this story moved you, if you saw your own mother, grandmother, or maybe even yourself in Evelyn, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. We tell real stories, inspired by real women, where every line carries the weight of survival and the hope of self-respect. Hit that like, share this with someone who needs strength today. And remember, I burned her photos, but they never burned her worth. Thank you for watching. And to every woman listening, you are not a burden. You are a chapter worth reading.